You think you know everything about the beloved precinct sitcom that real cops called the most realistic police show ever made? Think again. From a baseline inspired by James Taylor to death hoaxes spanning decades, marathon filming sessions lasting until dawn, and cast members who played criminals before becoming cops, these mind-blowing secrets will forever change how you see Captain Miller's squad room. Fact 1. The iconic theme song baseline was improvised. One of television's most recognizable bass lines came into existence through pure spontaneity and a simple request from a producer who had no idea he was about to create musical history. When the creators of Barney Miller needed a theme song for their new police sitcom in 1974, they turned to accomplished studio musician Chuck Berghofer, a man whose bass had already graced recordings by Frank Sinatra, Nancy Sinatra, and countless other major artists. The story of how this legendary bass line came to be is surprisingly casual for something that would become so iconic. Producer Dominic Hauser approached Berghofer during a recording session and made what seemed like an off-the-cuff request. "Can you do something on the bass? This guy is a cop in New York. Can we just start it out with the bass?" What happened next was pure musical magic, as Berghofer began improvising a bass line that would soon become one of the most memorable television themes of all time. The inspiration for this improvised masterpiece came from an unexpected source. Berghofer later revealed that while driving to the studio that day, he had been listening to James Taylor's song "Rock and Roll is Music Now," and the rhythmic patterns from that track were still floating around in his head when he sat down to play. If you listen carefully to both songs, you can actually hear the similarities in their bass patterns, showing how one piece of music can inspire another in completely different contexts. What makes this story even more remarkable is that Berghofer created this bass line without any written music or predetermined structure. He simply listened to the producer's brief description of a New York cop and let his musical instincts take over, crafting a groove that perfectly captured the gritty, urban atmosphere the show's creators were seeking. This spontaneous moment of creativity would go on to open every single episode of Barney Miller for 8 seasons. Fact 2. Jack Sue's last words were about his terrible coffee. Even in his final moments, Jack Sue demonstrated the same dry wit and perfect comedic timing that made his character Detective Nick Yamana so beloved by millions of television viewers. When the actor was being wheeled into the operating room for what would be his final surgery in January of 1979, he looked at his friend and co-star Hal Linden and delivered one last joke that was so perfectly in character it could have been written for the show itself. It must have been the coffee. This poignant moment becomes even more meaningful when you understand the running joke that Sue's character had maintained throughout the series. Detective Yamana was notorious among his fellow officers at the fictional 12th Precinct for brewing coffee so terrible that it became a legendary source of complaints and comic relief. The coffee was described as being so bad that other characters would grimace, make excuses to avoid drinking it, or openly mock its quality, yet Yamana would continue making it with complete obliviousness to how awful it tasted. The fact that Sue chose to reference this particular aspect of his character in such a serious moment speaks volumes about both his personality and his deep connection to the role that had made him famous. Rather than dwelling on his illness or expressing fear about the surgery, he instead chose to make his friend laugh by referencing the very thing that had brought joy to audiences for years. This spontaneous moment of humor was so perfectly timed and so characteristic of both the actor and his character that it has become part of television folklore. Sue had been battling esophageal cancer, which had forced him to miss the final 5 episodes of the 1977-78 season. He managed to return for 9 episodes in the following season before his condition worsened, and he passed away on January 11, 1979, at the age of 61. Fact 3. Filming sessions regularly lasted until 6:30 a.m. Most television shows follow predictable schedules with reasonable hours, but Barney Miller operated under conditions that would make even the most dedicated workaholics question their sanity. Creator and executive producer Danny Arnold was such an obsessive perfectionist that filming sessions regularly stretched from afternoon well into the early morning hours, with the longest recorded session lasting until 6:30 in the morning. What started as normal afternoon tapings would transform into marathon endurance tests as Arnold continuously rewrote and restaged scenes even after the studio audience had gone home. The process worked like this. Actors would arrive for what they expected to be a standard taping day, but instead of following a finished script, they would find themselves waiting around the stage for hours, while Arnold sent down newly written pages from his office. Sometimes at 2 in the morning, exhausted cast members would be handed completely rewritten scenes that they had to memorize on the spot. The crew members, equally exhausted, would scramble to reset lighting and camera positions to accommodate Arnold's constant changes and improvements. This chaotic schedule affected different cast members in varying ways, depending on the complexity of their roles. Ron Carey, who played Officer Levitt, often got his new lines fairly quickly since his character typically delivered simple messages like, "Here's your mail, Captain." However, Steve Landesberg, who played the intellectual detective Dietrich, faced a much greater challenge because Arnold would sometimes hand him lengthy speeches about complex scientific topics like nuclear fission that had to be memorized and performed convincingly in the middle of the night. Max Gale later referenced this grueling schedule during the Jack Sue Memorial episode, mentioning that one of the clips they showed was from a scene we finished around 2:30 in the morning. A 1977 blooper even captured a crew member mentioning that it was 3:15 in the morning during filming. Fact 4. Abe Vigoda was mistakenly declared dead 14 years before his actual death. In 1982, People magazine made what would become one of the most famous editorial mistakes in entertainment journalism when they referred to Abe Vigoda as the late Abe Vigoda in an article about a Barney Miller rap party. The problem was that Vigoda was very much alive and performing in a stage play in Calgary, Canada, which was why he couldn't attend the party in the first place. This single error would snowball into a decades-long running joke that followed the actor for the rest of his life. Vigoda, who was 60 years old at the time and in excellent physical condition despite playing the perpetually tired Detective Fish, took the mistake with remarkable good humor. He posed for a now famous photograph that appeared in Variety magazine, showing him sitting upright in a coffin while holding the issue of People that had mistakenly declared him dead. This image perfectly captured both his sense of humor and his willingness to play along with the absurd situation. The false death report had real consequences beyond just being funny. Vigoda's wife began receiving condolence letters from people who believed he had actually passed away, and the actor himself noted in a 1988 interview with the Toronto Star that, "My wife keeps getting condolence cards from people who believe I died." The error was repeated by other media outlets over the years, including a New Jersey television reporter who called him the late Abe Vigoda on air in 1987, before correcting herself the next day. The situation became so well known that it eventually led to the creation of a website called abevigoda.com in 2001, which had the sole purpose of informing visitors whether the actor was currently alive or dead. The site became a popular internet destination, and when Vigoda actually did pass away in January of 2016 at age 94, some news outlets took special care to emphasize that this time the reports were real. Fact 5. 2 future cast members first appeared as criminals. In an unusual twist of television casting, 2 actors who would eventually become beloved members of the Barney Miller police squad first appeared on the show as the very type of criminals they would later be arresting. This behind-the-scenes casting decision demonstrates how impressed creator Danny Arnold was with certain guest performers, leading him to bring them back in completely different roles that would define their careers. Steve Landesberg made his first appearance on Barney Miller during the 2nd season in an episode called Doomsday, where he played a character known as Father Paul, a con artist who posed as a priest while selling Bibles that he had stolen from hotel rooms. Landesberg's performance as this fake religious figure was so memorable and well executed that Arnold decided to write him into the regular cast as Detective Sergeant Arthur Dietrich, the intellectual and scientifically minded detective who would become known for his encyclopedic knowledge and dry wit. The transformation from Bible-stealing fake priest to erudite police detective couldn't have been more dramatic. Ron Carey followed a similar path from criminal to cop, though his original character was far more physically demanding and comically elaborate. He first appeared in a 2nd season episode called The Mole, playing a bank robber nicknamed Angelo the Mole, who had developed the unusual specialty of tunneling underground to break into banks and other buildings. Carey spent the entire episode covered in dirt and constantly coughing up dust as he explained his subterranean criminal methods to the bemused detectives. His performance was so entertaining that Arnold created the character of Officer Carl Levitt specifically for him, the eager and diminutive uniformed officer who desperately wanted to be promoted to detective. Both actors successfully made the transition from playing one-time criminals to becoming series regulars, with their criminal characters serving as interesting footnotes to their later success as members of the 12th Precinct team. Fact 6. The show almost never left one set. Barney Miller achieved something virtually unheard of in television production by confining almost its entire 8-season run to a single location, creating what was essentially a stage play broadcast on television. Out of the show's 170 total episodes, an astounding 157 were filmed exclusively on the Squad Room set at the ABC Television Center in Hollywood, with only 13 episodes venturing outside this confined space for any significant scenes. This theatrical approach was completely deliberate on the part of creators Danny Arnold and Theodore Flicker, who wanted to focus entirely on character development and dialogue, rather than action sequences or location changes. The set itself consisted of just 3 areas: the main squad room where the detectives worked, Captain Miller's adjoining office, and a small restroom that was occasionally used for comedic purposes. This minimalist approach meant that virtually every story had to be told through conversation, character interaction, and the endless parade of suspects, complainants, and visitors who were brought into the precinct. The decision to stay in one location had practical benefits as well as artistic ones. By keeping production confined to a single set, the show could focus its budget on writing, acting, and the detailed character work that made it so beloved by both audiences and critics. Any action that took place outside the precinct, such as arrests, car chases, or crime scenes, was simply described by the characters when they returned to the squad room, forcing viewers to use their imagination rather than watching elaborate action sequences. This stage-like quality was particularly appealing to star Hal Linden, who had extensive Broadway experience and appreciated the theatrical nature of the production. The approach proved so successful that it influenced other television shows and demonstrated that compelling television could be created without expensive location shooting or elaborate production values, relying instead on strong writing and talented actors working within a confined space. Fact 7. Todd Bridges made his acting debut as a child criminal. Long before Todd Bridges became a household name as Willis Jackson on the hit sitcom Different Strokes, he made his very first appearance on television as a 9-year-old criminal being arrested in the squad room of Barney Miller. This debut role came in the final episode of the show's first season, titled The Hero, which aired on May 1, 1975, marking the beginning of what would become a significant career in television. In this early appearance, Bridges played a character named Truman Jackson, a young robber who had the unfortunate experience of being caught and arrested by none other than Elizabeth Miller, Captain Barney Miller's wife. The irony of this situation was not lost on the show's writers, as it created an unusual scenario where the police captain's own wife was making a citizen's arrest and bringing the suspect into her husband's precinct. This plot device allowed the show to explore the intersection between Barney's professional and personal life while giving the young Bridges a memorable introduction to television acting. The casting of Bridges in this role proved to be prophetic in more ways than one, as he would go on to have a complex relationship with law enforcement throughout his real life, making his debut as a young criminal somewhat ironic in retrospect. Just 3 years after this appearance on Barney Miller, Bridges would land the role that would define his career when he was cast alongside Gary Coleman in Different Strokes, which premiered in 1978 and ran for 169 episodes. The episode also served as an example of how Barney Miller often featured young actors who would later become well-known performers, giving them early opportunities to work alongside experienced television professionals in a show that was known for its high-quality writing and character development. Fact 8. The show was initially considered for an X rating. One of the most pivotal moments in Barney Miller's history came during the filming of the 5th episode of the first season, titled The Courtesans, when creator Danny Arnold engaged in a high-stakes standoff with ABC network censors that would ultimately transform the show's fortunes. The episode dealt with the arrest of several prostitutes, and the conflict arose over a single punchline that the network considered too risque for television at the time. The controversial moment occurred at the end of the episode when Detective Woji Howich, known as Wojo, had fallen for one of the arrested prostitutes during the booking process. After she left the station, the innocent and naive Wojo turned to Captain Miller and made what seemed like a simple request. He asked to borrow $50 until payday. The implication was clear to adult viewers, but ABC censors demanded that this suggestive punchline be removed from the episode entirely. Arnold refused to back down from what he saw as an essential part of the story and the character development. He told the network executives that he was prepared to quit his own show rather than compromise his creative vision by removing the joke. The standoff created a tense situation where the future of the entire series hung in the balance over a single line of dialogue that lasted only a few seconds. Rather than lose their creator and producer, ABC made the unusual decision to air the episode with an X rating, something virtually unheard of for a primetime sitcom. This unprecedented move generated enormous publicity and curiosity among viewers who wondered what could possibly be so scandalous in a police station comedy that it warranted such an extreme rating. The strategy worked brilliantly, as the show's ratings jumped dramatically from 51st place to 21st place, establishing Barney Miller as a must-watch program and proving that sometimes creative integrity can lead to commercial success. Fact 9. Jack Soo was born on a ship in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Jack Soo, who would later become famous as the coffee-brewing detective Nick Yemena, entered the world under circumstances that were as unique as his eventual career in entertainment. The actor was literally born on October 28, 1917, aboard a ship sailing in the middle of the Pacific Ocean while his parents were traveling from Oakland, California to Japan, making his birth location one of the most unusual origin stories in television history. Soo's parents, who lived in Oakland, had made the deliberate decision to travel to Japan specifically for his birth because he was their oldest son, and they wanted him to be born in their ancestral homeland, according to traditional family customs. However, nature had other plans, and instead of waiting until the ship reached Japanese shores, the future actor decided to make his entrance into the world while floating somewhere in the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, technically making him a citizen of international waters at the moment of his birth. This maritime beginning was just the first of many interesting chapters in Soo's life story. Born with the name Goro Suzuki, he would later change his name professionally when he entered the entertainment business, eventually becoming known to millions of television viewers as the dry-witted detective who could never quite master the art of making decent coffee. The irony of his oceanic birth becomes even more interesting when you consider that his character on Barney Miller was known for his deadpan delivery and philosophical observations about life, almost as if his unique beginning had given him a different perspective on the world from the very start. The circumstances of his birth also reflect the cultural traditions and family values that were important to his parents, who were willing to undertake a major ocean voyage to ensure their son was born in Japan, even though the plan didn't work out exactly as they had intended. Fact 10. Real NYPD officers called it the most accurate cop show ever. While most police shows on television focused on car chases, shootouts, and dramatic confrontations, Barney Miller earned the highest praise possible from the people who would know best. Actual police officers who worked the job every day, real detectives from the New York Police Department, and other law enforcement agencies across the country consistently declared it the most realistic portrayal of police work they had ever seen on television, which was remarkable considering it was a comedy rather than a serious drama. The reason for this authentic feel was that Barney Miller chose to focus on the aspects of police work that other shows typically ignored or glossed over in favor of more exciting action sequences. Instead of showing detectives engaging in high-speed pursuits or dramatic shootouts, the show concentrated on the endless paperwork, the frustrating bureaucracy, the long hours of questioning suspects and taking statements, and the parade of unusual characters that real police officers encountered during their daily shifts. New York police detective Lucas Miller wrote in the New York Times that the show accurately depicted how the action was mostly off-screen, with the real work happening in the squad room where detectives dealt with a motley bunch of colleagues who worked hard, made jokes to cope with stress, and answered to their straight-man commander. Actor Dennis Farina, who worked as a Chicago police officer before becoming an actor, called Barney Miller the most realistic cop show ever seen on television during an appearance on a talk show. The show's creator Danny Arnold achieved this authenticity by deliberately avoiding the dramatic elements that made other police shows exciting but unrealistic. Rather than showing the arrests or crime scenes, the show focused on what happened afterward, the booking process, the interrogations, the paperwork, and the interpersonal dynamics between officers who spent long hours together in cramped quarters dealing with society's problems. Fact 11. The cast memorial episode featured a fourth wall break. When Jack Soo passed away in January of 1979, the remaining cast members of Barney Miller chose to honor their friend and colleague in a way that was virtually unprecedented in television history. Instead of writing his character's death into the show or simply moving forward without explanation, They created a special episode called Jack Sue, a retrospective that completely broke the fourth wall by having the actors appear as themselves rather than their characters. This unique tribute episode aired on May 17, 1979, as the season 5 finale, and featured Hal Linden, Max Gale, Ron Glass, Steve Landsberg, Ron Carey, and James Gregory sitting on the familiar squad room set while speaking directly to the camera about their personal memories of working with Jack Sue. Rather than pretending to be Captain Miller, Detective Wojciechowicz, Detective Harris, and the rest of the fictional police officers, they spoke as the real actors who had spent years working alongside Sue on a daily basis. The episode interwove these personal remembrances with clips from some of Sue's most memorable moments as Detective Yamana, including scenes that showcased his character's dry wit, his philosophical observations, and his notorious coffee-making skills. The cast members shared stories about Sue's professionalism, his sense of humor, and his ability to find comedy in the most mundane situations, giving viewers insight into both the actor and the character he had brought to life. The episode concluded with perhaps the most touching moment in the show's entire run, as all the cast members raised their coffee cups in a toast to their departed friend. This gesture was particularly meaningful because it referenced the running joke about Yamana's terrible coffee, while simultaneously serving as a genuine expression of love and respect from the people who had known Jack Sue best. Fact 12. Barbara Barrie demanded to be written off the show. In a highly unusual move for television at the time, Barbara Barrie voluntarily asked to be released from her contract on Barney Miller, despite holding the coveted second billing position in the opening credits, right after star Hal Linden. Barrie, who played Elizabeth Miller, Barney's wise and supportive wife, made this surprising decision after recognizing that the show was evolving in a direction that would minimize her character's importance and screen time. When Barney Miller premiered in January of 1975, the original concept was designed to balance Captain Miller's professional life at the 12th precinct with his personal life at home, with his wife and children. Barrie appeared in 7 out of the 13 episodes during that first abbreviated season, and her character was intended to be a significant part of the show's ongoing storylines. The producers had envisioned a series that would explore both the challenges of police work and the impact that job had on family relationships. However, as the first season progressed, it became clear that the most compelling and entertaining material was happening inside the squad room rather than in the Miller household. The interactions between the detectives, the parade of unusual suspects and complainants, and the workplace dynamics at the precinct were generating the best comedy and the strongest audience reactions. At the start of the 1975-76 season, Barrie recognized this shift and approached producer Danny Arnold with an unusual request. Rather than fighting for more screen time or demanding that the writers create more substantial storylines for her character, Barrie asked Arnold to release her from the show entirely. Arnold was reluctant to lose such a talented actress, but he respected her decision and agreed to her request. As a result, Barrie appeared in only 2 episodes during the second season before effectively leaving the series, though she continued to receive second billing throughout that year. Fact 13. The show featured early recurring gay characters. Barney Miller broke significant ground in television representation by featuring recurring gay characters named Marty and Daryl years before such portrayals became common or accepted on mainstream television. Creator Danny Arnold made the deliberate decision to include these characters because he believed it would be unrealistic to create a police show set in New York City without acknowledging the gay community, particularly since gay people often encountered legal troubles during the 1970s due to discriminatory laws and social attitudes of the era. Arnold understood the sensitivity required for these portrayals and took the unusual step of collaborating directly with the Gay Media Task Force, an activist organization dedicated to ensuring fair and respectful representation of gay people in entertainment media. This partnership helped ensure that Marty and Daryl were depicted as fully realized human beings, rather than stereotypical caricatures, which was unfortunately common in the limited gay representation that existed on television at the time. The characters evolved significantly over the course of their appearances on the show, reflecting both changing social attitudes and the writers' growing understanding of how to portray them authentically. Initially, both Marty and Daryl were presented in a somewhat stereotypically effeminate manner, but as the series progressed, Daryl's character began dressing and speaking in a more mainstream fashion, showing the complexity and diversity within the gay community rather than relying on a single narrow representation. The show also featured other gay characters, including Officer Zitelli, a mailroom clerk who had been keeping his sexuality secret from everyone except Captain Miller. In one episode titled The Child Stealers, Zitelli became angered by hostile remarks from other characters and boldly declared, "I'm gay," representing another breakthrough moment in television's gradual acceptance of diverse sexual orientations during a time when such openness required considerable courage. Fact 14. Abe Vigoda auditioned while exhausted from jogging. Sometimes the most perfect casting decisions happen by complete accident, and Abe Vigoda's legendary portrayal of Detective Phil Fish came about through one of the most unusual audition circumstances in television history. On the morning of his audition for Barney Miller, Vigoda was following his regular fitness routine of jogging 3 to 5 miles through the streets of Los Angeles when his agent called with urgent news about a new television series that needed him immediately. The agent's message was simple but emphatic: "Go there at once." The problem was that Vigoda had just completed a 5-mile run and was feeling tired and exhausted from the physical exertion, but the urgency of the call meant he didn't have time to go home, shower, and properly prepare for what would turn out to be one of the most important auditions of his career. Instead, he went directly to the audition still wearing his jogging clothes and carrying the natural weariness that comes from a long run. What Vigoda didn't realize at the time was that his post-exercise exhaustion was exactly what the role of Detective Fish required. The character was written as a world-weary, constantly tired police detective who was approaching retirement and felt worn down by decades of dealing with crime, bureaucracy, and the endless parade of problems that came through the precinct doors. Vigoda's naturally fatigued appearance and slightly breathless delivery perfectly captured the essence of a man who had seen everything and was ready to call it quits. The casting directors and producers immediately recognized that they had found their fish. Vigoda's authentic exhaustion, combined with his naturally hangdog expression and world-weary demeanor, created an instant connection between the actor and the character that would become one of television's most beloved police officers. The irony was that while Vigoda was actually in excellent physical condition and maintained his fitness through regular jogging, his momentary tiredness helped him land a role playing someone who was perpetually exhausted. Fact 15. The theme song was inspired by James Taylor. The iconic bass line that opens every episode of Barney Miller has a surprising musical connection to one of America's most beloved singer-songwriters, revealing how inspiration can come from unexpected sources even during the creative process. Chuck Berghofer, the studio musician who created the memorable bass line, later revealed that he had been listening to James Taylor's song "Rock and Roll is Music Now" during his drive to the recording studio on the day he improvised what would become television history. According to Berghofer, the rhythmic patterns and bass elements from Taylor's song were still floating around in his head when producer Dominic Hauser asked him to create something that would capture the essence of a New York City police officer. This musical influence explains why the Barney Miller theme has such a distinctive groove that feels both urban and sophisticated, combining the laid-back California sound that Taylor represented with the gritty atmosphere that the show's creators wanted to establish. The connection between these two very different pieces of music becomes apparent when you listen to both songs with careful attention to their bass patterns. While Taylor's song is a folk rock composition about the music industry, and Barney Miller's theme is an instrumental jazz fusion piece designed for a police sitcom, they share similar rhythmic structures and bassline approaches that demonstrate how musical ideas can cross genres and find new life in completely different contexts. This revelation adds another layer to the already fascinating story of how the Barney Miller theme came to be, showing that even spontaneous creative moments are often influenced by the music and experiences that artists carry with them. The fact that a James Taylor song helped inspire one of television's most recognizable themes demonstrates the interconnected nature of musical creativity and how inspiration can strike in the most unexpected ways during the artistic process.